bigger moment happening. Uranus and Jupiter, who have been getting closer and closer and closer since Jupiter went direct on December 31st last year, are finally conjunct. And they're conjunct at 21 degrees, 49 minutes, while the sun is almost at that square to Pluto. But to me, this is like the loudest, most confetti cannon, wild, wacky, inflatable tube guy moment of all the transits is this Jupiter Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And so I know that we have lots of notes about it. Janessa, do you want to lead us off? Just how do you read this?
Sure. Yeah. So to backtrack a little bit with Uranus and Taurus, I really loved something that Austin Coppock said on the Astrology podcast. I think it was for the year ahead episode for 2024. And it wasn't quite a throwaway comment, but they didn't really elaborate on it. But I have not stopped thinking about it since that Uranus and Taurus has really correlated with the rise of like cottagecore or like slow living and like this return to the earth type movement that we've seen like really heavily on Instagram. But in general, in trends, like farmhouse chic, yeah, just kind of like the most punk. I think that Austin said the most punk thing that you can do in with Uranus and Taurus is like give up the city life and like move to the country, grow your own food, and like Uranus, having the vibes of being rebellious and freedom seeking. Like that's the rebellious thing is kind of like this return to tradition in a lot of ways. Taurus being the sign associated with, like, I think of it as like the earth goddess sign, it's ruled by Venus and the moon. So like big ties to farming and agriculture and gardening. So that's kind of like the backdrop, I feel like, to this transit. Jupiter's been in Taurus now it'll be a year in May. So it's kind of been like amping this up, and Jupiter expands anything that it comes near. So I feel like this might be ramping up a lot of those types of themes. One really interesting related news story that has just speaks really literally to this is like, I think it's in France where the farmers have like brought in like bales of hay and have like used that like in the streets of Paris to like disrupt things. So literally like Uranus and Taurus like disrupting the status quo with agricultural means. So yeah, I wonder if it's going to be kind of like a high point of that. I also think that there's ties to Saturn a lot with this, and Saturn like being in Pisces. I think it's by Decan, where there's some ties, and it's not quite right with the modern rulerships for the Decans here, but there's some like shared overlap with the Saturn themes, and Jupiter being, ruling Pisces. I think there's overlap there. But I think a lot of this like the interest and the return to like the agriculture and the cottage core like really becoming a trend is a little bit naive, and there's like this sense that like it looks really good, it looks really fun, it looks really like peaceful and beautiful, like all of these Venusian things. But like what we don't see about that is the other side of farming, and like that is and agriculture work in general is like the Saturnine side of like death and like the hard work that it takes to do all of those things. That's something I've been reflecting on lately, is like there's like it all looks really good in Instagram pictures, but like you don't see like the slaughtering of the animals. You don't see the dealing with the manure, like um, all of those things. So I wonder if there's like a tinge of that, like um, that dreamy kind of like ethereal, like Neptune distorted uh, image that we have of like, oh, I'm just going to move to the country and like grow my own food, and like kind of that bubble being burst a little bit by like Saturn, um, and the reality setting in. Um, but yeah, I guess those are kind of like the big like themes I've been seeing. I think another one that kind of relates to the Uranus and Taurus is like breakthroughs in um, like medicine and like health and like things that can help with wellness. So like that would be something I'd really love to see with this transit, that we could see some type of scientific breakthrough that lends itself well to wellness and health topics. But yeah, those are kind of the themes I've been talking about with clients, like on the in the background, or like, you know, regardless of what is happening in your personal chart in your Taurus house.
Yeah, they're at the exaltation degree of Saturn too, that 20,
Mm.
I guess it's the 21st degree, so maybe it would be 20 and some change, but that got my attention. And when you were talking about like the reality of farming, there's this like picture of a woman with blonde hair and her hair is braided and like the grass is
Mm.
braided into her hair. And when I saw that, because my sister is a farmer, I was like, bugs.
Yeah.
That woman has so many bugs in her hair right now. Like it looks cute and her head is probably full of bugs right now. But and also this morning I was like hand washing my purse because it got dirty uh and so I was like, I legitimately unironically need a washboard right now, and it feels very Uranus Taurus, of like the return to like technology from 100 years ago that is still functional. And when you spoke about like breakthroughs in medicine, I have a brother that had kidney failure at 19 and has a couple of kidney transplants, and he joking around, he's like, I just need a 3D printed kidney. And I'm like, this is a transit that maybe would break through and like have artificial organs that would be, you don't have to wait for a cadaver to have an organ transplant, that maybe we can 3D print an organ for your body so that you can become the bionic man that you've always wanted to be, you know, like that will save your life and keep you off dialysis, and have that breakthrough moment, because that's what Uranus is, a disruptor of the norm, and disruption can be annoying and it can be harmful and it can be devastating. Disruption can also be the crack open of light that we need in a situation. And so Jupiter there being a benefic, hopefully that breakthrough is something that is positive in a realized, a tangible Taurian earthy way that we can all experience. And also that the moon, so Taurus can't see its ruler Venus because it's in Aries, but it can see the moon. That barely, at that moment, the moon is just hanging around long enough to see. um, it's at 29 degrees and 39 minutes, so it's like just within witnessing view before it moves over into Libra. But those are all beautiful reflections. Thanks for sharing, Shauna or Sonia. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got.
I'm with. Sorry, Sonia. Mine's quick. Mine's quick, if that's okay. I was
Yeah,
just thinking, was it actual manure or was it produce that those farmers were putting in the road?
it was like bales of hay and maybe manure too.
Bales of hay
Yeah.
and maybe manure. Okay, because I thought I saw images of them putting, like, dumping manure in the roads, and your reference back to cottagecore, and it's like the aesthetic pictures on Instagram or social media, versus what is actually behind the scenes. You
Yeah.
know, definitely different.
One thing I didn't say that I meant to is like also the backlash now that I've been seeing a lot, where like there's been like this rise in like trad wives, or like women who are like returning to like being homemakers, and like unironically, I think it maybe started out to be a little bit ironic or something, but now it's become like this thing of like women really going backwards in terms of like, you know, being submissive and like being homemakers. And there's no, this is not to knock people that want to do that. I love doing a lot of those tasks myself. Um, but like taking it to the next level where we've like regressed to a little too far maybe in terms of like women's rights and the backlash kind of starting now in the discourse, if you will, is, yeah, sorry, another tangent, but thought I'd throw it in.
Yeah, Janessa, you were right when you said about it being Saturn's decan. It's actually a double Saturn decan. So again, we've got another attention drawing decan. And Austin Coppitt describes it as prayer beats. It's the decan where you've kind of, and it's also, what's the card? The Seven of Pentacles, where you've done all the work, you've put everything in that you can, and then you've got to leave it to the fates to decide what's going to happen. And that just feels so Uranian as well, where it's out of our hands. We've kind of done all we can, and now suddenly this lightning bolt comes and it's going to do whatever it will. And he talks about in Taurus that particularly things like insurance come in because humans find ways to get around the fates. So particularly in things like farming, crops can fail. So you can put in all that work and do all that slow and steady Taurus thing of the planting and the nurturing and everything, and still the weather can suddenly throw a curveball at you. And so it's like there's nothing to do but sit and pray and have your prayer beads. And that's the quality, the story of the decan that we're in, where it's this double Saturn of, okay, we're, you know, who do we pray to? So that's kind of the healthy container again of okay, have we done all we can to mitigate here? What do we need to look around us? What precautions do we need to take? We've planted our seeds, but have we nurtured them? Have we? Let's not be naive and trust that everything's fine. You know, are there any other precautions we can take? And I've got some questions again from our webinar, which is about Uranus being the call to be authentic. And how important is it to you to be true to yourself? You know, are you okay wearing a mask? Or is there something, as this conjunction gets closer, is there something that you're starting to feel uncomfortable with that's coming up for you? And can you tune into that and listen to it? And what price would you be willing to pay for that? Because there always is a price if you're going to abandon a mask and be authentic to yourself. There's usually a loss. It might be friendships fall away, or, you know, coming out as an astrologer even has a cost, we've found. But what are you willing to risk? Because Uranus comes with risks, and we have to be careful that they're realistic. And for that, I would say check in with the friends around you, ground yourself, just to be sure when you get this urge for freedom that you're in a healthy container. It's such a good word, but you know, when those urges come up, you know, are the people around you all with one voice saying you're mad, or are they saying that's a great idea, go for it, but have you thought about XYZ? And when they say that, do think about XYZ, you know, and just make sure that you've done some Saturn work as well. You know, great for Uranus, great to have these breakthroughs and these ideas, but also what would Saturn want? And let's make sure Saturn's happy in this mix as well. And the archetypes that came up when I was looking at this was like the eternal child and Icarus, because obviously he thought he could fly to the sun, and he didn't take those precautions with the wax that melted his wings. So it is that thing of, yeah, these great dreams, but we've really got to be grounded in how we plan them out. So those are my thoughts. Yeah.
I love those. And one thing I was reminded of is, you know, there's the chart called the Thema Mundi, and it's the, you know, imaginary chart of the world. It's used as a teaching tool. But in the Thema Mundi, Jupiter finds his joy in the 11th house. But in the Thema Mundi, the 11th house is Taurus because it's a Cancer rising chart. And so if we think about, like, let's use that as like the chart of the world. So we think of the 11th house as like the collective house, the house of support that pushes to the 10th, which is the top of the chart. And so if we think of something breakthrough happening in the 11th house, kind of that we would collectively experience, in modern astrology, they use Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius, kind of the same thing. And while we don't use that, sometimes different types of astrology will rhyme or harmonize, even though they're not saying the exact same thing. But um, I just wonder with that conjunction happening in the Thema Mundi in the 11th house, is there going to be a collective thing that is shared that then begins a radical transformation in the tangible reality of Earth? And I had a reading with Nick Dagan Best, one of my favorite astrologers, and he talked about 2024 kind of being the real beginning of this century. And if we think about the 1900s, from 1900 to 1920, yes, it was the new century, it was the 20th century, but the changes that happened then were still pretty reminiscent of the century prior. In the 1920s onward, you had things that, like, the cog in the machine turned in a way that there was no going back. Like, we left horsepower, we started to drive around in cars. Women received the right to vote. There was that second wave of feminism that came after the 1800s. Like, the gender roles started to really shift. Wars started to happen. It was like everything really started to change after 1920. And he speaks about April of 2024 kind of being that moment. And I glean from that, it's that this is the moment that April becomes the powerful month for the next 100 years. That's how important this moment feels. And while it might not be as loud personally to you, I feel like it's going to be personally loud to me because I have Mercury at 21 degrees, 49 minutes. So I'm expecting a message. I'll just put that on record, Mercury. Um, but I feel like it will be collectively experienced as a shift, a very palpable shift. How that will be, maybe it will be subtle to a lot of people. Again, maybe it'll be someone that is born on at this moment that will go on to really radicalize the world and shift it forward in a way, hopefully for the good, because just because time continues on doesn't mean that we necessarily improve. We have to make the right choices to improve every day, all of us collectively, to do that. But I'm excited for this. I feel like it's going to be tangible because it's in an earth sign. I feel like it's going to be loud because Jupiter is loud, Uranus is loud. And with that position in the Thema Mundi being in the 11th house of hopes and dreams, I'm hoping it'll be for the good. And as astrologers, we need to be mindful of the time. So unless anybody has any final thoughts, Shauna, do you want to jump in? I know that you've got a slight delay, so I don't want to speak over you.
It's okay. I'm trying to be cognizant of it. The only thing I was thinking is, when you mentioned a cog turning, how beautiful is it that Uranus has like that 84-year cycle too? Um, and it would push us just into the next century. And it feels like, those first 2 decades in my mind are, there's that giant mysterious hand that just starts pushing the wheel. And those first 2 decades are as that wheel is shifting. And then the second decade, the 20s, are when it finally lands into its next position. And then you can start that cycle all over again. So it's just no.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Chinese astrology, they have 20-year periods, and period 9 started with the new moon in February. And so we have this 20-year period that corresponds with the Pluto ingress into Aquarius. I mean, there's lots of ages and lots of studies all over the world. It's not just astrology that kind of look at these periods of time. And this year is a kind of a potent time for all sorts of those timing techniques, across oracle use, whether it's Chi Mendujai or Western astrology. Um, Again, like they harmonize and they rhyme with each other, even if they're not saying exactly the same thing.
I went to a ISAR lecture, and it was about Steve Jobs and about how all the significant points on his career were totally tied into this cycle of Uranus and Jupiter. All the releases of, especially the breakthrough Apple products, but also him leaving and coming back and forming different companies and everything, were all either oppositions or conjunctions. But he also mentioned that, like, great inventors are often born at this time. So somebody could be born now or born 14 years ago that we won't know of until 28 years, or, you know, multiples of that they become in our consciousness, but we find that they've been born like with a birth chart that looks just like this, which is really interesting.
Yeah, this is going to be somebody's birth chart, or many people's birth chart.